Hello, Badge Chatters. Welcome to our return to YouTube Live for a hashtag Badge Chat K-12 show and tell. We are live this week with Rich Dixon of the PDLN. He is at Rich Ed Tech on the Twitter. Rich, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Noah. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to talking about micro-credentials and digital badges with educators today, but there's implications for student use as well.
Absolutely. And for anybody who doesn't know Rich already, Rich is one of our earliest folks to join our tribe here at Badge Chat K-12. He's with us just about every week. He's moderated several of the chats, and they've been doing some really amazing work in the teacher micro-credentialing space. And I've just noticed over the last several months, there is a huge amount of interest in our little community around what other folks are doing around micro-credentialing for teachers. And so I invited Rich to come join us because some of the work that they're doing is really amazing and stuff people need to know about. So I guess we'll kind of jump right in. Rich, do you want to just kind of quickly tell us just a little bit about PDLN and your personal journey to my digital badge credentials?
You bet. So I'm an educator of over 20 years. I spent most of my years in the elementary area, but I've always been involved with professional development, training teachers specifically around either science education and or educational technology, whether that's at teacher preparation programs all the way to classroom practitioners. I've been working with different ways to personalize those professional development experiences. And this is where the importance of digital badges and micro-credentials come in, the ability for learners to represent meaningfully their accomplishments in those learning environments so that people, not just at their school or even in their district, but beyond, understand the value of all of the learning and hard work that we as educators do every year, whether it's studying on our own and informal learning or sitting through formal presentations and other professional development initiatives. So a little bit back on our background, a couple years ago, one of my colleagues, Jennifer Gibson, and I helped co-found and launch PDLN to address the challenge of how do we honor prior learning, create a competency-based PD model, and then recognize those accomplishments. And that's when we began creating a number of different online tutorials specifically around ed tech content for schools and districts and individual teachers. And then we became aware of Noah's work, Kate Tolnai, others that are in this space that were really welcoming us as we began to explore how do we better recognize those accomplishments. And that's when we entered this whole wonderful world of digital badges and micro-credentials that I'll start to unroll a little bit more here in a bit.
So if I understand correctly, you were kind of already helping teachers level up as professionals, and you saw digital badge credentials as a way of kind of better recognizing the learning that was happening.
Especially as we were trying to tackle the challenge of how do we honor prior learning and get away from a one-size-fits-all, sit and get, everybody's putting in the time, only getting a little slice of new and challenging information throughout the course of the day. How do we evolve beyond that or add something else to the toolbox? I don't know that we'll ever move away from having some of the synchronous learning, and I'm not suggesting that there isn't a role for that. But what I do want to be clear about is that as we continue to evolve and better serve students, we often talk about personalizing and making their learning meaningful. And on the flip side is, as educators, when we go through learning, I love it when I'm inspired when I go through trainings, because then I'm fired up when I go back to the classroom. And we wanted to create an online solution that would do something similar, that would inspire teachers to more personalize learning because of what they experienced themselves when they did PD.
Totally, and I think that there's a real important point that you brought up there, and that's that we're really at this point not just encouraged, but expected to be, personalized instruction for our students. And, at the same time, on the PD side, we don't necessarily see enough, that there's this expectation that the professional development is personalized. So the very, practitioners that we're tasking with, bringing personalized instruction into the classroom, that they deserve to experience it themselves as learners.
Absolutely. I can't agree with that more. That's really well said, Noah.
Rich, before you go in, I know you have some slides to help us, kind of put pictures to words here in a minute. But before you do that, just real quick for the folks who are joining us live, he is at Rich Ed Tech on the Twitter. And If you have any questions for him live while we're on there, go ahead and tweet them at us. We're using hashtag BadgeChatK12. I'll be refreshing the hashtag, make sure that we get those questions answered. And so, Rich, let's go ahead and just dive in. I know that you kind of had some stuff prepared that you were going to share out with us around the ways in which PDLN is going about their micro-credentialing.
Yeah, that's great. I'll go ahead and do that. And let me share my screen here. As I begin, one of the exciting things, Noah, that I want to mention is that from year to year, I have seen such an amazing evolution in people's engagement with digital badges and their level of understanding. A year ago, I think, Noah, you and I and Kate and others, as we've gone around the country talking about digital badges, we've gone from just explaining what is about, meaning what is this thing called the digital badge or micro-credential. And we've really moved into, I think, now an area where individuals are asking, how do I create a program, and how do I create something, a program that honors prior learning, whether it's for adults or for students, and grow that and sustain that. And so while I will be talking about our work at PDLN, I do want to let folks know that at the very end of this presentation, there's a link to a bunch of free resources to get started on your own. And I'd be happy to follow up with you and talk about that as well. And this is a slide deck that many of us, including Brandy Miller, who I've yet to mention and recognize, put together as we collaborated around a free set of resources to help those that are interested get started. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Micro-credentials and digital badges. So as we move forward, here's an example of digital badges. I'm going to touch a little bit on some basics for those of you that are just joining for the first time and are getting used to digital badges, but I'm also going to move somewhat rapidly through for those of you that are maybe already doing badging and looking for different ways to approach a program that utilizes digital badges. So digital badges and micro-credentials, for the sake of my discussion and presentation today, you will hear me use synonymously. Different people have slightly different interpretations and meanings of what those phrases mean. And there's even more terms that are used to describe, essentially, very generally speaking, the same basic concept. So I'm going to be using those two terms synonymously today. And a digital badge is a graphic, just like you see up here with Chromebook Essentials in the upper left-hand corner. When I click on that graphic, though, it will launch me out, and I have a screen that explains this later, and tells me more about what was achieved in order to earn that digital badge, much like a badge from, say, the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or in other domains in life. Those graphics represent, symbolically, a much deeper set of skills, knowledge, or experience. And digital badges have the unique ability, of course, to live online and describe even more than what is just seen on its surface. So what we do at PDLN is we offer a number of different courses. You can see some of them here on a number of different educational technology topics. In this example, this course content is specifically geared to teachers, but you can imagine how this would be useful for students if you had different content, or maybe even the same, but appropriated for their developmental level. And again, is really just an example of how we take lots of course content and then we represent it graphically. Courses for us, the way that we structure them are knowledge and experience and learning that equals 15 hours worth of work because we have optional university credit. And I would like to say thank you to our university partner, University of the Pacific, which you can see in the lower right-hand corner, which allows for that. So,
and Rich, can we just real quick back up on that one part? Because I'm guessing that there's a lot of folks, if they weren't already aware of this, that they saw that at the bottom of the screen, earn university credit.
Yeah.
So that is really a whole new level to these credentials. Can you just tell us a little bit about just how that evolution came to be, and
you bet,
maybe even other rumblings you're hearing about in the community about where it's going?
Sure, you bet. One of the biggest challenges, I think, for those of us that are working with digital badges and micro-credentials is creating value, or what is sometimes called currency synonymously. In other words, if I issue or share my digital badge with somebody else in an email signature, or online, or in LinkedIn, or any other social profile, the recipient or the viewer, the consumer of that badge, needs to be able to understand its meaning and see it as something that's valuable. And within the educator community, we know that associations of learning with higher ed, with the university that's accredited and offers university credit, provides a level of implied rigor around what was accomplished, and the evaluation, meaning somebody else from the outside that is official takes a look at it. And I want to be clear that not every single situation in which a badge is used or a micro-credential is used in the world necessarily needs to have a formal university validate it. But we do know that for educators, this is a helpful way for them to show that their learning was meaningful. And for some, helps them to renew a teaching credential or a licensure, depending on your state's terminology. And in some cases, also helps them move up the pay scale for additional units that are earned. So Noah, does that explain a little bit about that for you?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, excellent. Let's move right along to the next slide. It's going to be a little overwhelming because there's so many little icons. But within each one of those big courses are sections or modules. We happen to use the Canvas learning management system as our platform to deliver this content. And I'll be explaining what that content is in more detail in another slide. But the point is that each of those sections can be taken or learned in and of itself, just for its own sake. And we represent that with a smaller unit, and those are micro courses. And so if you think of chapters as in a book, if you think of a traditional textbook, most of the time in a course, you don't necessarily get through the entire textbook. You could, if you're really advantageous or your professor is really pushing you in that. But you may just get certain sections or certain chapters that are really of importance to you for your particular need at that moment. And roughly, micro courses are an equivalent to that, if you think about it as a chapter of a book. So for example, real quickly, if you were interested in going to the upper left-hand corner here, using technology to teach English language development, you might want to just focus on that particular micro rather than other sections of a course that attend to literacy, for example. So in other words, it allows the learner to zero in on just what they need to learn rather than having to work through a larger unit of content. They can focus just on one small content. So to go back and review, a course, 15 hours worth of work, assuming that you know nothing. If you know something, you can shorten the amount of time you're on task. And then a micro is just a section that might take 1 to 2 hours, maybe even 3 in certain situations. So,
and Rich, you mentioned that one of the kind of beautiful and elegant things about this is moving beyond just seat time, and you really see these credentials being a way to recognize and value and honor prior learning as well. And so is that something that you're also aiming for here, that if that instructor has, real demonstrated capacities for using technology to teach English language learners, that might be a way where they can really speed up that seat time equivalent in order to just be credentialed for the skill that they're already demonstrating?
Absolutely. That's a great and important point. I'm really glad you brought that up because let's say, for example, I'm just going to use one that I'm looking at, which is Google Forms toward the top. Maybe I already know how to create a Google form, but maybe I'm not sure how to allow those that are taking the Google form, say students or other educators, how to upload a document or a file to that form, because that's a relatively new feature. I could go ahead and demonstrate what I already know by creating a form, but then spend time learning how the upload process and enabling that and the design around that would work for those that are taking and consuming that form, if you will. And so what that means is that you get to skip the parts that you already know and focus just on learning and choosing for yourself the content that you need to know. And I'm going to talk about the assessment and how this plays out in another slide. But I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and real quick, for anybody who is watching this live, we are on YouTube, and you can be asking your questions directly to Rich just by tweeting them out on hashtag BadgeChatK12. And we do have a question here from Lauren D asking Rich, have you seen people using digital badges on their resumes? And is that a place we can go for teacher micro-credentials?
Yes, I'm just starting to see evidence of that. I was just back in New York with a colleague, Mark, last month in New York, and what they're doing there in a particular school district. And hopefully we'll have them someday soon on Badge Chat Show and Tell as well. It'd be great. Is that they're allowing all of their teachers to go through and take different learning pathways, different collections of these small learning chunks, these micros. And they have their own system, not using PDLN. And they will be allowing their teachers to embed the URL for those badges into their resume. And I'm really excited about that because, again, teachers then have a control over showing very specific discrete skills that might be important if they were, say, going to transfer to a new school or move to a new school district, or and I hate to say this, isn't intended to be a downer, but we know that most teachers aren't going to go from cradle to grave teaching. At some point, they're going to step away. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe some will leave early and go into other professions. And we're so highly trained and educated as educators. One of the biggest challenges is articulating in a meaningful manner to those outside of our traditional schools and districts the value of what we know. And these micro-credentials and digital badges allow for that communication to happen. And going full circle back to the question around the traditional resume, whether you put a hyperlink into a digital version of your resume or embed it inside of an email signature that accompanies that resume, or even if you have a printed version, printing out the actual URL that links to the digital badge is something that I'm just starting to see, and I'm looking forward to seeing that continue to grow.
Awesome. And quick shout out to Maddie Rector, elementary education student at the University of Oklahoma. She chimed in to you, Rich, that badges will hopefully be great as a resume builder, and talking about this kind of portability issue, that they'll stay online for easy access, which is great. A quick follow-up question for our friend April Moore in Croon Norco. She says it's nice to hear you using Canvas for your digital badges. Any news on when they might be open badges?
Okay, excellent. Great question. We do use open badges, and I'm going to take a quick side note to explain what that means here. In fact, I'm going to move a couple slides.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, I'm going to skip a couple slides ahead here. So let me land on this page. In Open Badge, which we use, we have a partner called Badger, badger.io, and that's badgr.io. And I've got a slide at the end that has their address. They provide the technical power and allow us to issue badges that have the graphic, as you saw. But then when you click on the graphic links out to what could be a number of different things. I'm using one example. What you see on your screen on the right is metadata, meaning when you click on the graphic, it links you out to a description of what has been learned. There's more information than what I'm showing you on the screen right now for metadata. It can include things like the date that the badge was issued, who issued it, so you get a sense of who did that, and the badge platforms will actually verify that you're legitimate. And if that still isn't enough, you can click out and go to their webpage and see who issued it. But what's critical again is that the metadata is what makes a badge open. If it's just the graphic, I jokingly call that a digital sticker. But in the rest of the world, if we click on that graphic and it takes you out to a list of the descriptions, objectives, outcomes, and even optional links out to examples of what that person did to earn a badge, then you have an open badge. And so we're really excited and really going good on the open badge movement and wanting to go all in on that. And so I know, April, you've been a big champion of that as well. And thanks for your question on that. And I'm proud to say that by partnering with Badger, an open badge platform, we are able to provide those open badges, which really allow the earner to own their learning. And Noah, sorry, one last thing I should put in there. If a badge is is open, again, the learner, the earner of it, get to stay in control. They own that, even though it may live in someone else's repository. It's not locked up in a paid system that has to be maintained financially in order to access that. And so as an educator, I'm a big believer in the open badge movement.
I think it's really awesome that you mentioned that, especially with this week being Open Resource Week. Great to be emphasizing that if folks aren't following the hashtag OER17, that there's a lot of great sharing going on there this week. And, Rich, for one thing to just highlight in case we do have folks who, some of the open badge stuff is a little in the weeds. If you're newer to digital badge credentials, something to really bring it back to here on the metadata is, you kind of touched on the issue of trust and validation, and one of the big differences between that kind of, as you referred to it, the sticker version of a badge and, really meaningful credentials of learning like what we're discussing today is the ability to attach actual artifacts that are evidence of having met the criteria for that badge.
And I think that's so powerful and such a great point to bring up, because then any viewer or what's called a consumer of the badge can judge for themselves by lining up not only the standards, as you can see on your screen here, but the actual artifact that they can view within the metadata. So it's a really good point. I'm going to move forward with yet another slide here. We happen to line up all of our content because it is educational technology teacher professional development to a set of standards, the ISTE teacher standards. But I think one of the important aspects, or an important aspect for educators, can be lining up their accomplishments to different outside standards. It's not required in all examples or in all situations for digital badges to be issued or micro-credentials, but certainly I recommend it for those that are designing professional development, so that there's an outside source or a set of standards, a benchmark, if you will, that are referred to, that the digital badge or micro-credential points to help give it more currency and more validation.
And can we stay on that for a minute? We'll see if any other folks tweeting questions on that sort of notion that you bring up, Rich, about alignment to the badges. And we see a lot of examples for, especially on the teacher side, where the badges is maybe something that's very tool specific, right? Like, let's say that you can earn a Kahoot badge for using Kahoot, or demonstrating that you understand Kahoot. Can you kind of just explain a little bit more about why actually aligned to the standards might be more meaningful to both the badge earner and, as you said, the consumer, the audience with whom they share that badge, whether it's HR or a potential principal to whom they're applying for a job, where there might be more value of actually aligning the credentials that they're designing to standards?
I think it's a really important point to bring up, because let's say as a school that you issue a badge for a teacher or even a student, and that student moves on or wants to show their badge elsewhere. Whoever that consumer, the one that's reading over that badge, is going to want likely to have some sense of trust, and that the claims aren't being made solely by the learner or the earner. Now, in some cases that is appropriate, but oftentimes for academic purposes and learning, it's important to have an outside body, an outside set of standards that the badge attends to and points to in terms of where it's getting its outcomes or its objectives and its focus for those. And so I think those outside bodies like ISTE, again, if you're in the educational technology space, is a common and ubiquitous group for whom the standards are genuinely accepted across the board internationally. In other content areas, there are different bodies of standards and different objectives, and certainly citing those and lining those up to the content to those standards would be really important. And as a side note, it's very possible we do this work with some of ours. Our work that we do custom with some of the districts is sometimes people want multiple standards. Say the next generation science standards lined up with technology for STEM professional development. It's very possible to do what's called a crosswalk, where you take multiple standards side by side and find those commonalities and highlight each of those, so that that work can be seen and articulated as well.
And piggybacking on that crosswalk work and that commonality word used, I think that when we anchor the credential in something like a standard, it helps us enable the adult learners to demonstrate competencies in ways that are inspire them, in ways that tap into their passions, while also giving on the consumer side, whether it's again HR or somebody. Sure. That it allows them to compare the credentials apples to apples.
Yeah, that's a great example. And that's a really important bit, because a lot of times people are still trying to figure out at this juncture of the game what a credential, micro-credential, or digital badge really means. I think Dan Hickey at Indiana University said it well last week on a call. He said, right now, digital badges and micro-credentials are in the same spot that e-commerce was back in 1997. So people kind of get what they are, generally speaking. They see there's value there, but the whole ecosystem is still growing and still starting to be understood and valued by others. So while this is a relatively new thing, at the same time, we're seeing lots of great signs that people are excited, it's growing, and there's going to be more awareness and recognition, and therefore acceptance, based off the reasons, Noah, you just mentioned, of these kinds of credentials.
Awesome. Did he say who the Chris Sacca is?
He did not yet.
Who's Peter too? Okay.
He did not. He did not.
And we just so in case you're not watching the time, we have about 6 minutes left, Rich. And for anybody who is watching live, if you want to, that does give you time to sneak in one quick question. But in the meantime, it looks like you're on a new slide there, so go for it.
Sure. So what we do in-house here at PDLN is we create our own professional development videos, myself and our other co-founder, Jennifer Gibson, up there in the upper left-hand corner. We also curate. We have a number of different resources that we create ourselves, like note-taking guides and whatnot. The goal is to provide as many different ways for individuals to interact with content as possible so that they become as effective as possible with their teaching and learning. You can see embedded videos there. And then we have an assessment of knowledge, and I'm just going to push in here for a moment because I referenced and promised that I would touch upon it earlier. We provide learners with 3 to 4 different ways to demonstrate or put into practice their job embedded training. The way that they have learned gets to be put into their practice as teachers. And so while there's 4 different activities, assessment of knowledge is what AOK stands for, they can choose any one of those 4. The one down below, and this is an instructional design principle and philosophical stance that I'm most excited about, is that using the rubric, which you can't see here, they can create and submit an original assessment of knowledge that best meets their needs. And those are the ones that tend to be the most exciting, because at that point, the educator is owning their learning, meaning they have chosen with intent how they want to demonstrate that they've put into practice those new knowledge, skills, and experiences in such a way that's meaningful for them and their learners. And I get really excited about that. But we also know some educators don't like that blank slate. They need some structure and some guidance, and that's why we provide suggestions up top, 2 of which assume that you're in the middle of the school year and have students available, and 1 assumes that you're on vacation, so to speak. Students aren't around, and you're learning when you don't have access to trying this out with students. So just something else to throw out there. And the way that
real quick, we do have a last question, if you don't mind taking one from Kyle. Please. Clemens has a question that I think, especially because you're collaborating hand in hand with some of your school district clients in creating some of this content. He's wondering if you could speak more about how you design the badges to be value to that end consumer, aka the potential employer or institution.
Absolutely. Well, I think number one, I'm really glad you brought that up, because understanding the people that will be receiving those badges, what's important to their learning community, what's important to their broader local community and regional community, and then maybe even beyond that, is an important aspect of instructional design. So, for example, when we work with schools and districts, we're going to ask them what standards, what outcomes do they want? What are they looking for? What are some of the things that might be part of their strategic plan or learning outcomes? And then making sure that we line up the objectives and the syllabus to match those. And again, do a crosswalk if not. But I think it's really taking the time, as I think that question implies, to listen to and understand what the needs and objectives are, because what is good in Seattle, where I taught at one point, isn't necessarily the same as what we would need here in Southern California, where I'm based now. And so again, having those local needs in mind and being able to articulate what those differences are in the metadata and calling those out are really important. I do, for the sake of time, I am just going to slide by a couple things. We do use a 2-point rubric, if someone's proficient or not, and then people can call in and work with us if they are struggled and aren't awarded a badge. But when you earn a badge,
that idea that it's not about A's, B's, C's. It's either you have earned this credential or you are still working towards it.
Yes, exactly right. That's exactly right. And then for us, the big thing, and I think for those of you that are planning your own program, I think a critical part is the evaluation piece. And I've seen people underestimate the importance of planning for a team to do this. We use in-house credentialed teachers here, but we know some school districts where it's one person trying to keep up with all the submissions of work for, say, 1,200 or more teachers, and it gets really daunting. So you can either partner with somebody like us, or you can work with developing a group in-house to do that. But this is just a screenshot of what someone gets.
I think that's a really great sort of just project management point for people to keep in mind, that that make sure as you're designing that you're including some of the kind of more boring stuff like resource allocation and making sure you're not creating more work than you have human beings to help out with it.
Absolutely. No, that's a really good point. I promised to drop this slide in earlier. It's bit.ly/badges with capital B 17. And that gives you a Padlet that Kate Tolnoy, Brandy Miller, and I have created that freely shares some of these resources and more for getting started. Noah has, I believe, taken a look, and I know others out there have as well, and contributed ideas to it. And the idea is that we grow those resources. So for people that are wanting just free access to other resources that we didn't get a chance to speak to today, those are there as well. Again, bit.ly/badges17. I'll try to share that on Twitter after this as well. Speaking of that, I'm going to end with this slide. For more information, feel free to visit us at pdln.com or visit me on email, rich@pdln.com. The Twitter handle is there, @rich. And then I mentioned our badge provider, who I want to call out and thank, Badger, and they're at badger.io, and I've listed that there as well. So Noah, thank you for the ability and time to be here today.
Oh, absolutely, Rich. Thank you so much for being with us. And everybody should know that you do not just need to be a prospective client of PDLN. Rich is one of the more generous folks I've had the opportunity to meet in my PLN, and I know he spends just probably more time than his employers and his family would appreciate, just collaborating with anybody who has questions and wants to have their thinking pushed. So don't hesitate to reach out to Rich. Absolutely. And one quick pitch that I'll throw in for folks who aren't aware of it is the day before ISTE. Since Rich mentioned ISTE is June 24th in San Antonio, Texas. We are hosting the Badge Summit. And oh, Rich has a little slide up there for it. Awesome. It is going to be one awesome day of learning, badgesummit.weebly.com. And you missed pre-registration, but I'll tell you what, if you send me a message, I'll hook you up with a code to get you the early bird registration price, just for joining us here on Badge Chat K-12 on your Monday evening. And it's going to be one badgerific day of badge learning and sharing in San Antonio. We have some of the brightest minds on planet Earth coming to share with us, and hope that you will be there. And food, we have breakfast and lunch included. So definitely try and make the time to be there with us. Thank you to all the live viewers. This is the most live folks we've had in a long time, maybe ever, for one of our ones. I guess, Rich, you just packed the house.
I don't know. Noah, thank you so much for highlighting us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We do look forward to collaborating. And as Noah mentioned, feel free to reach out. We're happy to share and encourage you along with your journey, no matter where you are.
Awesome. Yeah, take him up on his offer. And thank you, everybody, for watching live. And if you have stuff that you want to throw out there for future Badge Chat K-12 topics, or you have work that you think needs to be shared on Show and Tell, please do reach out. I'm at SeniorG on the Twitter. You can reach me, Noah, at versuseducation.com. And thank you so much for sharing your Monday evening with us. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.